The rain hammered against the asphalt outside the Grand Plaza Hotel as Noah Chen stepped through the revolving glass doors, his Armani suit still pristine despite the 12-hour flight from Tokyo. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 34, he commanded Reynolds Financial Group with the same precision that had earned him a Harvard MBA and a corner office overlooking downtown Denver's skyline. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications about the merger that would cement his reputation as the youngest executive to orchestrate a billion-dollar acquisition. Success had become his religion, and money was the only prayer he knew how to recite. The valet approached with practiced deference, but Noah waved him off, preferring to handle his own luggage. Control was everything in his world. 3 years of building Reynolds from a struggling investment firm into a financial powerhouse had taught him that delegation meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant failure. His assistant had booked the penthouse suite, naturally, but Noah barely registered the luxury anymore. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and panoramic city views had become mere backdrops to conference calls and strategy meetings that consumed his waking hours. As he wheeled his leather suitcase toward the street to hail a cab, Noah's mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow's board presentation. The numbers had to be perfect, the projections flawless, because Richard Blackstone and the other senior partners were watching for any sign of weakness. They still whispered about his age, his rapid ascent, questioning whether someone who looked barely old enough to drive could handle the pressures of high-stakes finance. Noah had spent every day of the past 3 years proving them wrong, sacrificing sleep, relationships, and any semblance of personal life on the altar of professional validation. The attack came from nowhere. One moment Noah was reaching for his phone to call an Uber, the next he was slammed against the brick wall of the hotel's side alley. 2 men materialized from the shadows like predators who had been studying their prey. The taller one pressed a knife against Noah's throat, while his partner rifled through his pockets with practiced efficiency. Noah's mind, trained to calculate risk and probability in boardrooms, went completely blank. This wasn't a hostile takeover or a difficult negotiation. This was raw, physical danger, and all his Ivy League education meant nothing against the cold reality of steel pressed against his skin. The muggers worked quickly, professional in their brutality. They stripped him of his Rolex, his wallet thick with credit cards, and the briefcase containing documents worth millions. Noah stood frozen, his body betraying him when he needed strength most. The shame burned hotter than fear as he realized how helpless he truly was without his suits and titles to protect him. These men saw him as nothing more than a walking ATM, another wealthy mark too soft and privileged to fight back. Then everything changed in an instant that would reshape Noah's understanding of what real strength looked like. Marcus Rodriguez had been walking home from his security shift at the construction site when he heard the commotion in the alley. At 38, his body still carried the disciplined posture of his army days, though civilian life had softened some of the harder edges that 2 tours in Afghanistan had carved into his soul. He'd learned to read danger the way other people read street signs, and every instinct screamed that someone was in serious trouble just around the corner from the fancy hotel where people like him weren't supposed to linger. His daughter Emma was waiting at home, probably already asleep over her homework again. At 10 years old, she had inherited her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's stubborn determination. Attacking math problems with the same intensity Marcus had once applied to clearing hostile territory. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Maria had been gone for 2 years now, claimed by cancer that had fought harder than any enemy Marcus had faced overseas, and raising Emma alone had become his most important mission. Every decision filtered through one question: what kind of man did he want his daughter to see when she looked at him? The sight that greeted Marcus as he rounded the corner made his training kick in automatically. 2 attackers had cornered a man in an expensive suit, working him over with the casual efficiency of experienced predators. Marcus recognized the victim's type immediately, someone who'd never been tested by real violence, whose wealth had insulated him from the brutal realities that shaped most people's lives. Part of Marcus wanted to keep walking. Rich guys like this one usually looked right through people like him, treating security guards and construction workers as invisible fixtures in their privileged landscape. But Emma's voice echoed in his memory from just last week, when she'd asked him why he'd joined the army in the first place. He'd told her that some people needed protection, and that good people didn't walk away when others were in danger. Now those words demanded action, regardless of who the victim was or whether he'd ever acknowledge Marcus's existence under normal circumstances. Marcus moved with the fluid precision that had kept him alive in Kandahar, closing the distance before the muggers realized they had company. His approach was silent, calculated, designed to neutralize threats with minimal collateral damage. The knife-wielding attacker never saw him coming. Marcus's arms snaked around the man's throat in a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to the brain, while his other hand controlled the weapon. The second mugger spun around, but Marcus was already shifting position, using his unconscious partner as a shield while driving a precise knee strike into the attacker's solar plexus. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. Both muggers fled into the night, leaving behind Noah's belongings scattered across the wet pavement. Marcus helped the shaken executive to his feet, noting the way his hands trembled and his breathing came in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't just shock from the attack. This was a man whose entire worldview had just been violently recalibrated. Noah stared at his rescuer with a mixture of gratitude and confusion that Marcus had seen before in civilians who'd never witnessed real violence. The man was trying to process what had just happened, struggling to reconcile his assumptions about safety and control with the reality that all his money and status had made him a target rather than protecting him. Marcus gathered the scattered items methodically, his movements calm and purposeful, while Noah stood frozen in the aftermath of trauma. "You okay?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the steady reassurance he'd learned to project during crisis situations. He handed Noah his briefcase and wallet, noting the expensive accessories and designer labels that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. But seeing the genuine terror in the man's eyes, Marcus felt only compassion. Fear was fear, regardless of bank account balances, and everyone deserved to feel safe walking down the street. Noah managed a shaky thank you, his voice barely audible above the rain that had begun falling harder. He looked at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, taking in the weathered face and calloused hands of someone who'd lived a very different kind of life. The distance between their worlds had never been more apparent. Yet Marcus's intervention had created an unexpected bridge across the gap that usually separated people like them. As Marcus prepared to continue his walk home to Emma, Noah called out desperately, asking how he could repay such an incredible act of courage. The question revealed everything about the differences in their perspectives. Noah's instinct was to monetize gratitude, to solve problems with financial transactions, while Marcus had acted from principles that couldn't be purchased or quantified. The misunderstanding was innocent but telling, highlighting the vast gulf between someone who measured worth in dollars and someone who measured it in actions. Noah couldn't stop thinking about Marcus Rodriguez. 3 days had passed since the mugging, and the executive found himself staring out his corner office window, not at the quarterly reports demanding his attention, but at the construction site visible in the distance where hard hats moved like ants against the steel skeleton of a rising building. His hands had finally stopped shaking, but the memory of his complete helplessness remained vivid, a stark reminder that all his wealth and influence meant nothing when real danger struck. The business card Marcus had reluctantly accepted bore Noah's personal cell number, something he rarely gave to anyone outside his inner circle of investors and board members. He'd pressed it into the veteran's calloused palm with genuine desperation, wanting to maintain some connection to the man who'd saved his life. Marcus had accepted it with polite skepticism, clearly doubting that someone from Noah's world would follow through on promises made in the heat of gratitude. That assumption proved wrong when Noah's phone rang Thursday evening. Marcus's voice was tired but warm, calling to check on how Noah was recovering from the trauma. The conversation started awkwardly, two men from vastly different backgrounds struggling to find common ground beyond their shared experience of violence and rescue. But as they talked, Noah found himself genuinely interested in Marcus's life, asking questions about his daughter Emma and his work in ways that surprised them both. Marcus had been hesitant to share details at first, conditioned by years of being dismissed by wealthy clients who saw blue-collar workers as interchangeable service providers. But Noah's questions seemed genuine, lacking the patronizing tone Marcus had learned to expect from people in expensive suits. When Marcus mentioned Emma's struggles with advanced mathematics that exceeded her teacher's abilities, Noah felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness toward a child he'd never met. The following Saturday, Noah found himself doing something unprecedented in his carefully structured life. Instead of reviewing financial projections in his sterile penthouse apartment, he was driving his Tesla through neighborhoods he'd never bothered to explore, following GPS directions to an address in Riverside District that Marcus had reluctantly provided after Noah's persistent offers to help with Emma's education. The Rodriguez home was a modest duplex with a small front yard, where toys and bicycle parts suggested the presence of children. Noah parked his luxury vehicle on the street, suddenly aware of how conspicuous it looked among the pickup trucks and aging sedans that belonged to working families. His usual confidence deserted him as he approached the front door, unsure of the etiquette for entering a world so different from boardrooms and country clubs. Emma Rodriguez answered his knock, a slender 10-year-old with intelligent dark eyes and paint-stained fingers that suggested artistic pursuits beyond her mathematical interests. She studied Noah with the frank curiosity of childhood, taking in his casual clothes that still probably cost more than most families spent on groceries. Her assessment was neither hostile nor impressed, simply observant in the way of children who'd learned to read adults carefully. Marcus appeared behind his daughter, wiping grease from his hands with a shop rag that suggested he'd been working on some mechanical project. His smile was genuine but cautious, still processing the reality that a billionaire executive had actually followed through on visiting their modest home. The contrast between their environments was stark, highlighting the vast economic gulf that separated their daily experiences. The living room was small but meticulously clean, furnished with items that had clearly been chosen for durability rather than style. Family photographs covered one wall, showing Marcus in military uniform alongside images of a beautiful woman who could only be Emma's mother. The absence of recent pictures, including her, suggested a story of loss that Noah was only beginning to understand. Textbooks were stacked on the coffee table, next to mechanical drawings that appeared to be Emma's own work, revealing interests that extended beyond traditional academic subjects. Emma's mathematical abilities became apparent within minutes of Noah's arrival. She was working through calculus problems that would challenge college students, approaching each equation with methodical precision that reminded Noah of his own analytical nature. But what impressed him more was her creativity in finding solutions, her willingness to explore unconventional approaches that revealed genuine mathematical intuition rather than mere memorization of formulas. When Noah mentioned his own background in financial mathematics, Emma's eyes lit up with excitement that transformed her serious demeanor. She began asking questions about complex market analysis and investment algorithms, with the enthusiasm of a child discussing favorite toys. Her curiosity was infectious, drawing Noah into explanations of concepts he hadn't thought about in educational terms for years. Marcus watched their interaction with protective alertness, ready to intervene if the conversation became overwhelming for his daughter. But Emma was clearly thriving under Noah's attention, flourishing in ways that suggested she rarely encountered adults who understood her intellectual capabilities. The sight of his daughter's excitement awakened feelings in Marcus that he'd thought died with his wife, hope that Emma might have opportunities beyond what his limited resources could provide. As the afternoon progressed, Noah found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't experienced in years. The Rodriguez home lacked the luxury he was accustomed to, but it possessed something his penthouse apartment completely lacked: warmth, authenticity, and the simple pleasure of genuine human connection. Emma's laughter filled spaces that had been empty in his life without him realizing it, while Marcus's quiet strength provided a different model of masculinity than the aggressive competition that dominated Noah's professional world. The conversation eventually turned to Emma's educational needs, and Noah learned about the limitations of her current school's resources. Her teachers, while well-meaning, lacked the training to challenge a student whose abilities exceeded their own. The advanced programs in Denver required testing fees and transportation that stretched Marcus's budget, creating barriers that kept gifted children from low-income families trapped in inadequate educational situations. Noah's first instinct was to solve the problem with money, offering to pay for private tutoring or exclusive educational programs. But Marcus's response was more complex than simple gratitude. While appreciative of Noah's generosity, the veteran was clearly uncomfortable with charity that highlighted his inability to provide for his daughter's needs. His pride wasn't false or destructive, but rather the healthy self-respect of a man who'd worked hard to rebuild his life after military service and personal tragedy. The tension between Noah's desire to help and Marcus's need for dignity created their first real conflict, revealing the deeper challenges that would face any relationship between people from such different economic circumstances. Noah's wealth made solutions seem simple, but Marcus understood that accepting too much help could undermine his daughter's respect for his role as her provider and protector. Emma, with the wisdom that children sometimes possess, proposed a compromise that surprised both adults. She suggested that Noah could help her with mathematics, while she taught him about mechanical engineering, the subject that had captured her imagination through watching her father repair everything from motorcycles to household appliances. Her proposal transformed charity into exchange, preserving her father's dignity while accessing the educational opportunities she needed. The arrangement that emerged from their discussion was unprecedented in Noah's experience. Instead of writing checks or making donations, he would spend time each week working directly with Emma, providing intellectual stimulation while learning about aspects of life that his privileged background had never exposed him to. The commitment required him to rearrange his schedule, prioritizing relationships over the endless demands of corporate achievement. Marcus's workshop in the garage became their classroom, a space filled with tools and projects that represented a different kind of intelligence than what Noah was accustomed to valuing. Watching Emma disassemble and rebuild mechanical devices with the same precision she applied to mathematical equations challenged Noah's assumptions about intelligence and education. Her understanding of physics wasn't theoretical but practical, gained through hands-on experience with real-world applications. The weekly sessions became something Noah anticipated more than board meetings or investment presentations. Emma's enthusiasm for learning was infectious, reminding him of his own intellectual curiosity before it had been channeled entirely toward financial success. Her questions forced him to think about mathematics in new ways, explaining complex concepts in language accessible to a child while rediscovering the elegance and beauty that had first drawn him to numbers and analysis. Marcus's presence during these sessions added another dimension to Noah's education. The veteran's insights into problem-solving, gained through military experience and single parenthood, provided perspectives that no business school had ever taught. His approach to challenges was practical rather than theoretical, focused on solutions that worked in real-world conditions rather than idealized scenarios that existed only in academic models. The relationship between the three of them developed naturally, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than the transactional relationships that dominated Noah's professional life. Emma began calling him Uncle Noah with the casual intimacy of family, while Marcus's initial wariness evolved into something approaching friendship. For the first time in his adult life, Noah experienced unconditional acceptance from people who valued him for reasons that had nothing to do with his bank account or business achievements. These weekly visits began reshaping Noah's understanding of success and happiness in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The simple pleasure of helping a child learn, the satisfaction of earning respect through actions rather than wealth, and the warmth of belonging to something resembling a family awakened longings he'd suppressed for years in pursuit of professional advancement. The transformation was gradual but profound, like watching a black and white photograph slowly develop color and depth. Noah began questioning assumptions that had guided his entire adult life, wondering if the pursuit of wealth and status had cost him more than he'd realized. The Rodriguez family was showing him alternative definitions of richness that had nothing to do with financial portfolios and everything to do with the quality of human connections. The first crack in Noah's carefully constructed world appeared during the monthly partners meeting at Reynolds Financial Group. Richard Blackstone, the firm's most senior partner and Noah's longtime rival, had been conducting what he called due diligence on Noah's recent activities. The man's silver hair and predatory smile masked a calculating intelligence that had destroyed more than one promising career over his 30-year tenure at the firm. Blackstone's presentation began innocuously enough, reviewing quarterly performance metrics and client satisfaction scores. But Noah sensed danger in the way his colleagues' eyes gleamed with anticipation, like a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey after months of patient stalking. The other partners shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, recognizing the signs of corporate warfare about to commence in their pristine conference room. The attack came disguised as concern for the firm's reputation. Blackstone had hired a private investigator to monitor Noah's activities, justifying the invasion of privacy as protecting Reynolds Financial Group's standing in Denver's exclusive business community. Photographs appeared on the conference room's massive screen, showing Noah's Tesla parked outside the Rodriguez duplex, images of him working in Marcus's garage with Emma, and surveillance shots of their weekend visits to public parks and community centers. The implications were clear, though Blackstone was careful to frame his concerns in professional rather than personal terms. Noah's association with a blue-collar family from Riverside District raised questions about his judgment and priorities. Wealthy clients expected their financial advisors to move in similar social circles, to understand their values and lifestyle choices. How could investors trust someone who spent his free time in working-class neighborhoods instead of country clubs and charity galas? The interrogation that followed was masterfully orchestrated, with Blackstone leading his allies in systematic destruction of Noah's credibility. They questioned his focus, his commitment to the firm, and his understanding of their clientele's expectations. Each criticism was delivered with surgical precision, designed to wound while maintaining plausible deniability about personal motivations. Noah found himself defending not just his professional choices but his fundamental values, trying to articulate beliefs about human worth and authentic connection that sounded foreign in the sterile environment of corporate governance. His words about Marcus's integrity and Emma's potential seemed to hang in the air like alien concepts, incomprehensible to people who measured worth solely through financial metrics and social positioning. The meeting concluded with an ultimatum disguised as friendly guidance. Noah could continue his charitable interests privately, but any public association that might damage the firm's reputation would force the partners to reconsider his position. The message was unmistakable. Choose between the financial empire he'd built and the family he was growing to love. Meanwhile, Marcus was facing his own crisis of conscience as news of Noah's prominence began filtering through their neighborhood. Word traveled quickly in working-class communities, and Marcus's neighbors had started asking pointed questions about the expensive car parked outside his home each weekend. Some expressed suspicion about Noah's motives, wondering what wealthy executives really wanted from families like theirs. The pressure intensified when Emma's school counselor requested a meeting to discuss her unusual tutoring arrangement with someone identified only as a, quote, prominent community member. The conversation was professionally courteous, but carried undertones of concern about appropriate boundaries between adults and children, especially when significant wealth disparities were involved. Marcus recognized the protective instincts behind these inquiries, understanding that his community had learned to be suspicious of wealthy outsiders who showed sudden interest in their children. The concern wasn't entirely misplaced, given the power imbalances that could develop when people from different economic strata formed relationships. But Marcus also knew Noah well enough by now to understand that his interest in Emma was genuine and beneficial. The situation became more complicated when Marcus's former military buddies began expressing their own opinions about his new friendship. During their weekly gathering at O'Malley's bar, conversations that once focused on sports and work now centered on Marcus's relationship with a billionaire executive. Some viewed it with suspicion, questioning what price might eventually be demanded for Noah's generosity. Jake Morrison, Marcus's closest friend from their Army unit, pulled him aside after one particularly tense evening to express concerns that went deeper than neighborhood gossip. Jake had seen too many veterans taken advantage of by wealthy civilians who collected military heroes like trophies, using their service records to enhance their own reputations before discarding them when the novelty wore off. The warnings stung because they touched on Marcus's own hidden fears about the sustainability of their unconventional friendship. The gulf between their worlds seemed to widen rather than narrow with time, highlighted by every interaction that reminded him of their different backgrounds and resources. Noah's casual mentions of business trips to Europe or client dinners at exclusive restaurants emphasized the vast gap in their daily experiences. Emma, with the emotional sensitivity that children often possess, began picking up on the adult tension surrounding her relationship with Noah. Her enthusiasm for their mathematical sessions remained unchanged, but she started asking questions about why some people seemed upset about her friendship with Uncle Noah. The conversations forced Marcus to confront his own conflicting feelings about accepting help from someone whose wealth made genuine equality impossible. The crisis reached its peak during what should have been a celebration of Emma's acceptance into Denver's prestigious Mathematics Academy, a specialized program for gifted students that would provide the intellectual challenges she needed. Noah's recommendation letter had been instrumental in her admission, and his offer to pay the substantial tuition fees had made attendance financially possible. But Marcus's joy at his daughter's opportunity was overshadowed by growing awareness of their dependence on Noah's generosity. Every aspect of Emma's educational advancement now relied on continued access to resources that could be withdrawn at any time. leaving her trapped between two worlds without belonging fully to either. The confrontation that had been building for weeks finally erupted during a community barbecue where Noah had been invited to meet Marcus's extended circle of friends and neighbors. The event was intended as a gesture of acceptance, a way for the community to welcome someone who had clearly become important to the Rodriguez family. But the cultural differences that had seemed manageable in private became glaring in the group setting. Noah's attempts at casual conversation revealed the vast gulf between his experiences and those of people who lived paycheck to paycheck. His stories about business challenges seemed trivial compared to the real-world struggles of families dealing with layoffs, medical bills, and housing insecurity. The breaking point came when Mrs. Hernandez, Emma's elderly neighbor who had helped care for her after Maria's death, made a comment about rich people who played with poor families until they got bored and moved on to new entertainment. The words weren't directed specifically at Noah, but everyone understood their implications. The silence that followed was deafening, forcing both men to confront the fundamental questions about their relationship's sustainability. Noah's response revealed the depth of his transformation over the past months, but also his continued blindness to certain realities of class and privilege. His passionate defense of his friendship with Marcus and Emma was heartfelt, but missed the subtle ways his wealth had already begun changing the family's dynamics and community relationships. Marcus found himself caught between loyalty to Noah and responsibility to his daughter and community. He could see the genuine care in Noah's actions, but he also understood the concerns of neighbors who had watched wealthy outsiders make promises they eventually abandoned. The question of whether their friendship could survive the scrutiny and pressure from both their worlds had become unavoidable. That evening, after Noah had left for his penthouse apartment, Marcus sat in his garage workshop staring at the mathematical equations Emma had written on the whiteboard. Each formula represented knowledge she had gained through Noah's tutoring, opportunities that wouldn't have existed without his intervention. But they also symbolized a dependence that made Marcus deeply uncomfortable, a loss of self-sufficiency that challenged his identity as Emma's provider and protector. Emma found him there, approaching with the careful steps of a child who sensed adult distress she couldn't fully understand. Her questions about whether Uncle Noah would continue visiting revealed how much their friendship meant to her, but also highlighted the emotional risks involved if circumstances forced them apart. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Marcus as he realized that his decisions would determine not just his own future, but Emma's educational opportunities and emotional well-being. The man who had saved Noah from physical danger now faced the much more complex challenge of protecting his daughter from potential emotional harm while preserving a relationship that had brought unexpected joy into both their lives. Meanwhile, Noah returned to his luxury apartment feeling the isolation more acutely than ever before. The evening's tensions had forced him to confront the reality that good intentions weren't sufficient to bridge fundamental differences in background and resources. His wealth, which had always been a source of power and security, now seemed like a barrier preventing genuine connection with people he had grown to love. The choice that loomed before both men would test everything they had learned about friendship, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family in ways neither had anticipated when a chance encounter in a dark alley had first brought their worlds together. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide Noah's life into before and after. Marcus's voice was steady but distant, carrying the controlled emotion of a soldier delivering difficult news. He spoke carefully, choosing words that had clearly been rehearsed, explaining that their weekly sessions needed to end. The decision wasn't personal, he insisted, but practical. Emma's acceptance into the Mathematics Academy meant she would be busy with new challenges, and Marcus felt it was time for their family to stand on their own again. Noah listened to the polite explanations while staring out his office window at the construction site where he knew Marcus was working. The real reasons remained unspoken, hidden beneath layers of diplomatic language that couldn't mask the finality in Marcus's tone. When Noah asked if they could discuss the situation in person, Marcus's response was gentle but firm. Some decisions, he said, were made to protect the people you loved most, even when those decisions broke your own heart. The conversation ended with Marcus thanking Noah for everything he had done for Emma, acknowledging the genuine impact of his mentorship while making clear that this gratitude didn't change the necessity of separation. Noah sat in his executive chair for an hour after hanging up, unable to process the sudden emptiness that had opened in his chest. The quarterly reports on his desk seemed like artifacts from another person's life. meaningless columns of numbers that could never measure the value of what he had just lost. Emma's reaction to the separation was the most devastating aspect of Marcus's decision. When her father explained that Uncle Noah wouldn't be visiting anymore, her confusion quickly transformed into the kind of grief that only children can express with such raw honesty. She demanded explanations that Marcus couldn't provide without revealing the adult complexities that had made their friendship unsustainable. The 10-year-old's world had been fundamentally altered by Noah's presence, expanded in ways that couldn't simply be reversed by his absence. Her mathematical abilities had flourished under his guidance, but more importantly, she had experienced the joy of being understood and valued by an adult who appreciated her unique gifts. The sudden loss of that validation left her feeling abandoned and confused, unable to understand why someone who claimed to care about her would simply disappear. Marcus watched his daughter retreat into herself, spending hours in the garage workshop where she and Noah had shared so many learning sessions. She would sit at the workbench, moving mechanical parts without purpose, her brilliant mind struggling to process an emotional equation that had no logical solution. The sight of her pain reinforced Marcus's conviction that he had made the right choice, even as it tore at his own heart. The veteran had learned in combat that some sacrifices were necessary to protect what mattered most, but civilian life had taught him that emotional wounds could be just as devastating as physical ones. Emma's withdrawal reminded him of his own behavior after Maria's death, the way trauma could cause people to shut down rather than risk further hurt. The parallel terrified him, raising questions about whether his protective instincts had caused the very damage he was trying to prevent. Noah's attempts to maintain contact were met with polite but firm boundaries that made clear Marcus's resolve. Phone calls went unanswered. Text messages received brief responses that discouraged further communication. When Noah appeared at the construction site hoping for a face-to-face conversation, Marcus spoke with him only long enough to explain that continuing their friendship would compromise his daughter's emotional stability and his own ability to provide for her independently. The rejection cut deeper than Noah had expected, revealing how much the Rodriguez family had come to mean to him. Their weekly sessions had provided structure and purpose that his professional achievements had never delivered. Emma's laughter had filled silences in his life he hadn't realized existed, while Marcus's friendship had offered a model of masculinity based on service and sacrifice, rather than competition and accumulation. Without their presence, Noah's penthouse apartment felt like a mausoleum of material success. The luxury that had once validated his achievements now seemed hollow, emphasizing his isolation rather than his accomplishments. He found himself driving through Riverside District in the evenings, hoping for glimpses of the life he had briefly shared, but the sight of their duplex with lights glowing warmly in the windows only intensified his sense of exclusion. Reynolds Financial Group demanded his attention with increasing urgency as the quarter end approached, but Noah struggled to summon the focus that had once driven his professional success. The board meetings that had previously energized him now felt like exercises in futility, discussions about wealth accumulation that seemed meaningless when measured against the simple happiness he had experienced in Marcus's garage workshop. Richard Blackstone watched Noah's deteriorating performance with satisfaction that he took care to hide behind expressions of professional concern. The senior partner's campaign to undermine Noah's position was succeeding beyond his expectations, as his rival seemed to be destroying himself through distraction and poor judgment. Blackstone had simply provided the pressure that revealed Noah's fundamental unsuitability for corporate leadership. The breaking point came during a presentation to Reynolds Financial Group's largest client, a pension fund worth hundreds of millions in management fees. Noah's analysis was technically sound, but delivered without the passionate conviction that had made him legendary in financial circles. His recommendations felt mechanical, lacking the intuitive understanding of market psychology that had built his reputation. After the clients left expressing polite but obvious concerns about the firm's direction, Blackstone called an emergency partners meeting. The discussion was brief and brutal, with Noah's recent performance providing ample justification for the actions his colleagues had been planning for months. His partnership was restructured in ways that stripped away most of his authority, while preserving the firm's legal protections against his potential retaliation. Noah's reaction surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of fighting the decision or negotiating for better terms, he simply accepted the demotion with weary resignation. The empire he had spent years building no longer seemed worth defending, when its preservation required abandoning the values he had discovered through his relationship with the Rodriguez family. That evening, Noah sat in his office after the building had emptied, staring at the city lights that stretched endlessly beyond his window. Each illuminated building represented thousands of people living their lives, forming connections, building families, finding meaning in ways that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market share. He had achieved everything he had thought he wanted, only to discover that success without authentic relationships was simply elaborate loneliness. Emma's absence from his weekly routine left a void that no professional accomplishment could fill. Her enthusiasm for learning had reminded him why he had fallen in love with mathematics in the first place, before it became merely a tool for wealth generation. Her questions had forced him to think beyond profit margins to consider the human impact of financial decisions, opening perspectives that his business education had never explored. Marcus's friendship had provided a different model of strength, one based on service and protection rather than domination and acquisition. Watching the veteran navigate single parenthood with such dedication had challenged Noah's assumptions about success and sacrifice. The man who delivered pizza and worked construction had achieved something Noah's billions couldn't buy, a child who adored him and a community that respected his integrity. The irony wasn't lost on Noah that his attempt to help the Rodriguez family had ultimately highlighted his own poverty of spirit. His wealth had created dependency rather than empowerment. His good intentions had generated complications rather than solutions. And his presence in their lives had attracted scrutiny that threatened their peace and stability. Sleep became elusive as Noah replayed every moment of their friendship, searching for signs he had missed, opportunities to handle situations differently. The mathematical precision that served him well in business was useless for understanding the emotional equations that governed human relationships. He had approached their friendship like a problem to be solved, rather than a gift to be treasured, and his analytical nature had ultimately contributed to its destruction. The city beyond his window continued its restless activity, but Noah felt suspended outside the flow of life, watching from a distance he seemed unable to bridge. The success he had pursued so relentlessly had delivered exactly what it promised: financial security, professional recognition, and social status. But those achievements felt hollow when measured against the simple joy he had experienced helping a 10-year-old girl understand calculus, while her father watched with quiet pride. Noah realized that his greatest failure wasn't losing his position at Reynolds Financial Group or seeing his business empire reduced. His greatest failure was allowing external pressures to override his own values, choosing the approval of people he didn't respect over the love of people who had changed his life. The recognition came too late to change the immediate circumstances, but it planted seeds of determination that would eventually reshape everything he thought he knew about success, sacrifice, and the courage required to live authentically in a world that rewarded conformity above all else. 6 months later, the Colorado Youth Science Fair buzzed with excitement as hundreds of young minds displayed their innovations and discoveries. Noah stood near the back of the gymnasium, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt instead of his former executive uniform. His new consulting firm, focused on financial literacy education for underserved communities, operated from a modest office downtown where he worked directly with families rather than managing other people's wealth. Emma Rodriguez commanded attention at Booth 17, explaining her mechanical engineering project to a panel of impressed judges. Her presentation detailed a water filtration system designed for low-income households, combining advanced mathematics with practical engineering in ways that demonstrated both intellectual brilliance and social awareness. The project bore the hallmarks of her unique perspective, bridging theoretical knowledge with real-world applications. Marcus stood beside his daughter, his pride evident in every gesture as he watched her confidently answer complex technical questions. The past months had been challenging as they adjusted to life without Noah's involvement, but Emma's resilience had surprised them both. Her withdrawal after the separation had gradually given way to renewed enthusiasm for learning, though she often mentioned missing the mathematical discussions that had sparked her initial passion. When Emma spotted Noah in the crowd, her face lit up with joy that she couldn't contain despite the months of separation. She abandoned her booth to run toward him, leaving behind the judges and curious spectators to embrace the man who had first recognized her extraordinary potential. The reunion was emotional for all three of them, tears mixing with laughter as they acknowledged how much they had missed each other. Noah's transformation was immediately apparent to Marcus, who recognized the change in his former friend's demeanor and priorities. The driven executive had been replaced by someone who radiated contentment rather than ambition, whose questions focused on Emma's happiness and growth rather than achievements and recognition. His new work helping families understand financial planning and college funding represented a complete departure from his former pursuit of wealth accumulation. The conversation that followed was tentative initially, all three of them aware of the pain that had accompanied their separation while hoping for healing that would allow them to reconnect. Noah shared how losing their friendship had forced him to examine his values and priorities, leading to decisions that had cost him professionally but restored his sense of purpose and authenticity. Marcus spoke about his own struggles with pride and protection, acknowledging that his decision to end their friendship had been motivated by fear as much as wisdom. Watching Emma's sadness over the past months had taught him that shielding her from all potential disappointment might also deprive her of meaningful relationships and opportunities for growth. Emma's perspective, expressed with the clarity that children often bring to complex situations, helped both men understand that their friendship had been worth fighting for rather than abandoning. Her forgiveness came easily, but her wisdom ran deeper than her years as she articulated how their separation had taught her about loss, resilience, and the importance of honest communication in relationships. The science fair provided the perfect setting for their reunion, allowing them to focus on Emma's achievements while rebuilding trust and connection. Noah's genuine interest in her project, combined with his new understanding of appropriate boundaries and expectations, created space for a healthier dynamic than their previous arrangement. As the day concluded with Emma receiving a first-place ribbon in engineering innovation, the three of them walked together toward the parking lot, where Marcus's truck sat beside Noah's modest sedan. The contrast in their vehicles reflected the changes in Noah's lifestyle, but more importantly, it symbolized his commitment to building relationships based on equality rather than charity. Their new beginning wouldn't erase the complications that had previously challenged their friendship, but it was built on stronger foundations of mutual respect, honest communication, and shared commitment to Emma's well-being above all other considerations. The science fair had become more than a celebration of young talent. It was the launching point for a relationship that honored both their differences and their deep affection for each other. The veteran who had saved a stranger in an alley, the executive who had learned that wealth couldn't buy happiness, and the brilliant girl who had brought them together had discovered that some connections are worth whatever effort and sacrifice they require to maintain and nurture. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.